My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again.
Hello and welcome back to Tracking Trends. Yes, we are going to be talking about what everyone has been waiting for: Donald Trump and his Liberation Day. US President Donald Trump unveiled his reciprocal tariff plan. He tweeted out, uh, just as he made this announcement, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. We are going to reclaim our wealth. This is the beginning of Liberation Day in America. Now, that was Donald Trump. I have with me Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, who heads the South Asia practice of Eurasia Group. It's a US based risk consulting firm. Pramit has been a journalist and an economic analyst for more than 3 decades. He was also the foreign affairs editor of Hindustan Times. Welcome, Pramit. Uh, let's begin by asking the question: is it really going to make America great again?
Trump's view, or that of the MAGA group, is that the economics of America today, where you've had a giant financialization of the economy, excessively strong dollar, and a trade structure that, because the dollar is exaggeratedly strong, has resulted, as you mentioned, a deindustrialization and hollowing out of America's manufacturing capacity. Therefore, and that in return has resulted in the immiserization of the American working class. So this has to be reversed, in effect. Broadly, there is an argument for that economic philosophy and thinking. There's no doubt about the decline of the American working class in terms of its income and so on, and the massive loss of jobs in manufacturing that has taken place. So that philosophy has two elements to it. One is isolationism, that America's military alliance structure has also bled America dry. But the other thing, of course, is that that services, an economy that is overly dependent on finances and technology, has made itself completely uncompetitive in manufacturing, especially against a powerhouse like China. But Trump's idea of how to do this, how to make America great again, or make America industrially great again, is deeply flawed. Part of it is Doge under Elon Musk, which is to transform the US economy, or transform US government, which in their view is overly, ensures that, for example, you can't build infrastructure in the United States. Its regulatory systems are simply impossible to overcome, and so on and so forth. That's true, but Doge is not doing it in the proper way. There's no evidence that they are getting their act together. They're going after small government entities, but the regulatory element, the legislative element, is simply not taking place. But the other side of it is the trade side. How do you correct decades of trade imbalance? Trump's view, and this is really his personal view, he seems to be obsessed with this, is use tariffs. That tariffs is the instrument. He loves tariffs. Since the 1990s, he goes on and on about how wonderful tariffs are because he doesn't really understand how they work. His assumption is that a tariff will automatically mean domestic production will rise. He assumes it is actually non-inflationary, which is in defiance of almost all economic thinking. And he believes that American consumers will not pay for the tariffs, that these will be paid for, effectively become a tax on imports, which will generate huge amounts of revenue. In fact, he said that, in my view, if we can raise enough tariffs, we can just abolish income tax in the United States. All of these are deeply flawed. So the tariff weapon, in my view, will not work. and but some form of reindustrialization in the United States will take place, but not because of the tariffs, but really because of a broader consensus in America, which is was true in the Biden administration and within the Trump administration, that this is an absolute necessity for the United States.
Trump claims that these tariff measures will raise $6 trillion, will bring in $6 trillion to the US over the next 10 years. A simple arithmetic calculation is that would mean 600 billion per year. And if you divide it by America's population, it means $5,000 per American. Should these tariff hikes be passed on, because the US government also doesn't seem to be in a position to absorb all of that? Should they be passed on to consumer, every American consumer will be spending $5,000 more. So, would it be correct to say is the American consumer who is going to be the hardest hit by what has been announced?
Yes, I mean, the expectation is, and we've already starting to see that after the earlier tariff cuts and trade actions by the Trump administration, that inflation is starting to creep up again in the United States. And the expectation that, especially with countries deeply integrated in American supply chains, Mexico, Canada, you're going to have to see a rise in the inflation rate. If it also goes along with, and that is perfectly possible, a devaluation or mild devaluation of the dollar as a consequence, we'll also see further inflation come in as the dollar loses some of its buying power. That's not clear as yet, because dollar still is seen as a safe haven currency, and ironically, disruption caused by the United States will often result in the US dollar getting stronger. But all of this feeds into the idea this will be inflationary. We're already seeing anecdotal reports of small American businesses and factories shutting down or laying off workers because of tariffs. They're saying that if I can't import, I need components from Mexico. I need steel and aluminium. He imposed an enormous tariff, 25% on steel and aluminium imports. But America doesn't produce very much steel. It produces only about 60, 70% of its internal demand. Most of that specialty steel. 30% of it has to be imported. It'll take years before a steel factory comes up in the United States, especially given regulatory problems. So those companies are saying we're no longer profitable. So we have to lay off workers. So that will also hit. It's simply not clear yet the degree of the impact that we will see. The assumption on the payments or the revenue that will be gained from tariffs assumes, however, that demand for those imports does not fall off sharply, which is what I would expect. If you're going to have an enormous tariff imposed on wine from France, or electronic products from China, well, automatically you will see a drop in demand. The problem is we have no idea how to calculate the drop in demand, because the tariff is not always necessarily passed on to the customer in full. Companies will often absorb some of the tariff themselves, the ones that are exporting. The retailer in America may trim his margins a little. So a 25% tariff may result in, let's say, a 10% increase in price. But that should result in, let's say, a 5 or 7% drop in demand. These are numbers I'm making up as I go along, but I'm just saying we don't fully know the impact. It's very hard to tell. Also, keep in mind that in preparation, in expectation of these tariffs, and the Trump administration as a whole, many companies have pre-positioned supplies in the United States. So the Chinese, even Indian companies have been shipping products in large bulk to America over just the past 3 or 4 months.
But that will give them an interim relief, not very very long. I mean,
Yeah,
unless
it's like at least 2, 3, 4 months. But the point is that during that 3 to 4 months, and this is where India and certain countries may have the advantage, is countries that have begun negotiations on those tariffs are in a position to begin to ameliorate them or have them removed uh, but before the end of the year. Countries that do not have such a track with the United States are the ones that are going to suffer.
Hmm. What happens if, because of these tariffs, the US inflation rate starts inching upward?
Well, this is going to be a huge problem for Trump because he has promised that that will not happen. Inflation, Americans are very inflation sensitive. You saw how much damage inflation did to the Biden administration. Um, and if it combines with a decline in the value of the dollar, even slightly, it will mean interest rates will rise. The U.S. Federal Reserve, Trump may yell and scream at them, but they will not budge on the fact that their mandate is to control inflation. So interest rates will rise, which is why suddenly I think Goldman Sachs and various other analysts have said we're looking at a 35% chance of a recession in the United States over the next 1 year. Which is a staggeringly high number given the fact that there is no particular reason for America to go into recession. It has had by Western standards very high growth rates over the past few years. So you have the possibility of inflation going up, interest rates going up, demand falling, unemployment rising, all simultaneously if this does not work out the way that Trump thinks it will. And there's a very good chance um, of it, at least two or three of those elements not working out the way Trump expects it to. And I think inflation would top the list on that.
Yeah. If one were to do economic reasoning, there are more chances that the gamble may not pay off. And if
Yes,
that
completely.
happens, as you very rightly said, the whole world looks to America when it comes to inflation rate and therefore interest rates. And if the US Fed is compelled to push up its interest rates, it's going to have a cascading impact on central banks worldwide, including India, where there is a growing clamor to. I mean, next week the RBI Monetary Policy Committee meets later this week, right? Um, so how serious is this fear of a recession?
A global recession, if America sinks, yes, definitely there will be definitely a massive slowdown in the United across the world. America is still the biggest consumer market. China would almost automatically follow because China has an enormous trade surplus in America. It exports something on the lines of $700 billion worth of products to the US alone. Its trade surplus is about $400 billion. At a time when the Chinese economy is doing very poorly, Chinese government claims 5 or 6% growth, but almost every external analyst and quietly a number of the Chinese researchers will say if they're growing at even 2 to 3%, anybody would be surprised. And that is not itself an issue. That's a larger story about China trying to change the nature of its economic growth model. But the point is, at this point in time, China cannot take up the slack and it cannot afford to lose American demand. So it would have an enormous drop in its own economic growth rate, at which point the two biggest economies in the world, probably followed by the EU and Japan, and potentially India is a little bit more self-sufficient, but also definitely seeing a sharp drop in growth in India as well. A massive slowdown in the global economy would follow. I mean, I would expect that.
How likely do you think the Trump administration may backtrack on some of the announcements they have made? Because the way they have actually worked out the tariff rates, which they said includes also non-tariff barriers, currency manipulation, and they have come up with these numbers, which are like uh, it's a revelation to almost all their trading partners. Uh, and it turns out that it really doesn't involve any complicated calculation around currency manipulation or non-tariff barriers. It's a simple calculation of taking trade deficit with a trading partner, dividing by exports, and multiplying it by 100 to arrive at this number, which is,
Correct.
is a very simplistic, amateurish, childish way of looking at things, if I can say, because this is how you are taught in trade economics just to get a sense of how protectionist is a country. This is one of the simplest yardsticks that people use. And they have actually taken this and made it a policy parameter. And such an important policy parameter. Well, should one be concerned the rushed manner in which this has been done?
So yes, the Trump administration has been extraordinarily chaotic in the manner it functions. Remember now, it's only been in power, what, about 70 days in power, right? And as you've mentioned, the trade, far from being a sophisticated trade-weighted calculation on tariffs, they've literally, just as you said, taken an undergraduate college level formula, applied it across the board, and done so indiscriminately to every country in the world, including, if you look at the list of countries, the Heard and McDonald Islands, which has no people. It's an island that is completely uninhabited. It has only penguins. But it has imposed a 10% tariff on that island, which goes to show that literally nobody, this was done by a group of White House staffers or something with an Excel sheet. Definitely nothing that an organization like U.S. Trade Representative's Office would have ever put out, simply, as you said, for the lack of sophistication and thought that went into it. So that this raises the question, can this be the basis of an actual policy, long-term policy? And the assumption is that, one, Trump he is in a hurry, there's no doubt about that. He feels he has to show evidence to his supporters that he can deliver quickly. A concern that with the midterm elections coming next year, by the spring of next year, America will effectively go back into elections, and every president in recent memory, including Trump himself, has lost control of the Congress in a midterm election. Therefore, it is assumed he will do the same. He has to get things done very quickly, and he himself is a very impatient man. And notice that he's doing this in the government before he has even confirmed most of his staff. In most government offices or most ministries in the United States government, you have a secretary, which is equivalent of a minister, and a deputy secretary, a number two max. After that, you have nobody else. He has not appointed or got confirmed most of his undersecretaries. So a lot of ministries, when you talk to people in Washington, so they're very bizarre. You have like this director level person, and then you have a minister, and you have nobody in between. This can work in Burkina Faso. It does not work for a country the size of the United States. So policy that is being declared at the top by the president is effectively being handled by staff that have no time, no experience, and no pressure, no capacity to do anything. So the result is, so my assumption is, but Trump is one who does react to public pressure and to opinion polls and even to the stock market. So the assumption is that the tariffs are part of are instruments that he wants to use to get things done. The question is, what will he want to get done with the tariffs? He always says this is if you read his book, The Art of the Deal, he says, how do I negotiate? I first get leverage on the other person. I find some means to get his arms twisted, and then I push and push and push until he concedes my demands. So what everybody assumes is the tariffs are his leverage. And now the question is, what are his demands? And he's already made it reasonably clear that on the trade side, he expects massive countries to invest more in the United States. It's important to realize there's an investment element to what he does. And his staffers, some of whom I've met in recent times, have said, look, you can compensate for your trade surplus in an area with investment. So if you can't buy LNG gas from America because it's not available, you can invest in an LNG terminal in America. So there's an investment out. So he wants to invest more, which is one of the reasons Saudi Arabia makes him happy, because Saudi Arabia is committed to $600 billion in investments. He wants you to buy more weapons, which is not part of normal trade figures at all. That's not incorporated in any of this. And third, he wants you to lower tariffs. and force you to do so in a manner that makes it politically acceptable to him. So the question, therefore, as I said, for countries now is, how do we quickly get out of this tariff trap and move to a point where we get a package deal with the United States in which the tariffs cease to be an issue, but you concede other points, or you come to an understanding between the two that allows you to move on, if you wish, to a normal or to a new normal in your trade relationship with the United States.
So that brings us to the question: what lies ahead of India then?
So India, I would say Eurasia Group actually thinks, our internal analysis, that India is actually one of the better off countries in the world regarding this, definitely much better than China,
Vis-a-vis
or
vis-a-vis the reciprocal tariffs.
in terms of it coming to an understanding with the United States. Yes. India, both when Modi and Trump met earlier last month, sorry, February, they basically agreed to a bilateral trade agreement in which tariffs would be a component. So you're going to have tariffs, you're going to have regulations, you're going to have military purchases, you're going to have a bunch of other things all mixed into that pie. That's always what you want in trade. India, to be fair, has always been interested in a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. It's been America that has turned down that offer. But remember, in the first Trump administration, they had actually indicated their interest in doing so. Both Bob Lighthizer and the then U.S. Ambassador Ken Juster had said, we want a bilateral trade agreement with you. But the administration fell, and there was COVID, so nobody really got a chance to take it forward. So for India, this is actually a good chance. Now, what's good for India, I think, is one, once you looked at the numbers, other than agricultural products, India's tariffs against America, especially its applied tariffs, are actually not that high. Normally in the roughly the 10% range for most of our products, pharmaceuticals, auto components, jewelry, and so on. So the game, therefore, is if you can work out a deal on the farm products, and even then within those there are just 3 or 4 items. India was willing to, and India, by most accounts, came up with a very radical proposal that India is prepared to go 0 for 0. In other words, we would reduce our tariffs of those products from the United States to 0, and we would, if America would do the same. And you'll notice that a large number of Indian companies came out. The automobile sector, the auto component sector, the textile sector, pharmaceuticals, all of that, jewelry, all came out and said, we can compete with America in our sectors. It's not a problem. And if we guarantee market access, that's much more important. And if it's a 0 for 0 deal, that works for us. So that I see on the tariff side, India's only asked for protection on a handful of agricultural products. In return, you give us 0 for 0. We'll give 0 for 0 on everything else. And our economy in many sectors are complementary. Pharmaceuticals, though that's actually been exempted completely from the tariffs, I should add. America doesn't produce generic medicine at all. We produce only generic medicine, or mostly generic medicine. America produces very high-end products, stents, cancer-saving drugs, which we don't manufacture.
Yeah, in fact, pharma stocks are up.
Correct.
2 to 4% in early morning trade, because pharma is what he has kept out, and pharmaceuticals are an important export item for India as far as US is concerned. So pharma has been taken care of. Auto, we know what happened because it had already been announced. These are 2 very important sectors for India. We don't know yet about what's going to happen on the electronics front, because we don't know. This is a 26% thing, flat announced. We don't know how sectorally it will pan out, right? So we'll have to wait and watch. As you say,
but on electronics, keep in mind that the biggest lobby group against that will be America, because our biggest exports are Apple iPhones, electronics, and in fact, other components that go into things like Google Pixel phones and so on. We produce mainly American products for the United States.
And does Elon Musk like Apple?
Probably not. I know they're squabbling over many things, but Trump listens to Apple. I mean,
Okay.
it is simply too large a company not to listen to.
Yeah.
Um,
So
so we
agriculture is going to be where you make or break a deal, right? As far as India
No,
is
actually, I actually think agriculture, I'm not certain, but I think we can come to an understanding on agriculture because we are not, it is going to only be dairy and some grain products and maybe sugar that we will have problems with. We don't have a problem with the walnuts, the apples, the almonds, because we already import them in huge amounts. We're the third largest importer of American apples in the world. We just don't produce enough. And that has something more to do with the low productivity of Indian agriculture for our own domestic consumption. That's why we have to import those apples. But we already import those. So reducing tariffs on that, I don't think will be a major issue. It'll be those elements. But I think the real problem, not say problem, but the difficult challenge, and that'll be the heart of the negotiations between now and I think we've given both sides have given a rough schedule of sometime in September, October, or sorry, October, November for conclusion of a BTA, is going to be digital regulations, cross-border data flow, data localization, e-commerce regulations. These are the issues where you have Elon Musk and Silicon Valley join hands together and say that India carries out discriminatory practices against U.S. investors in these areas, and that has to end. And this will run directly into the Modi government's support for national champions, and that will be the point of real contention. Some points I think we can come to an understanding. Data localization, possibility of a carve out for the U.S. For U.S. companies is possible, given the rise of global capability centers in India and an enormous amount of revenue and employment that they're creating. But other areas that will be the difficult point. However, the good point about that is it seems that the impression is that President Trump is very focused on manufactured goods. He's not so concerned about services. You'll
Yeah.
notice that he has had nothing to say about the fact that we have a $60 billion trade surplus
Yeah.
in services. He complains only about the $40 billion surplus in goods.
Yeah, that's right, and that's where probably there is some breather for India, and maybe, as you said, India may be a little better placed compared to some other countries, especially when we think of China, which is one of the hardest hit, with almost a 54% tariff that is being imposed. Uh, that said, it also remains to be seen how both New Delhi and Washington negotiate or hammer out sector-specific trade pact that they intend to do by fall of 2025. And also, it remains to be seen. India is the other way India could be impacted is what happens to the global economy, because India is also a fairly globalized economy. So we'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much for your time, Pramit. Our request to the audience: if you have liked this video, subscribe to it, share this, and press the bell button so that you get notified next time we have an insightful video like this one for you to watch. Thank you.